Welcome to Institutional FX Uncensored, your free weekly FX podcast. Listen to professional FX traders, currency hedge funds, and FX brokers from around the globe discussing the latest FX news, trends, and regulations. Be ready to navigate through the uncharted waters of the foreign exchange market like no one else has. Tune in.
Hi everyone, my name is Natallia Hunik and I'm the host of Institutional FX Uncensored Weekly Podcast. Our series of shows are for professional FX traders, high net worth individuals, currency hedge fund managers, FX brokers from around the globe. Today, I'm delighted to announce on our podcast today, Andrew Sachs. Andrew, welcome to the pod.
Hello, Natalia. Very nice to be here. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining. Andrew is a head of research and analysis at ETX Capital and also is a founder of Finance Feeds. Prior to joining Finance Feeds, Andrew has worked at most influential publications in the B2B FX margin space like Finance Magnets and LeapRate. So Andrew, let's dive in. Today we're talking about media and whether or not you should trust FX media and review websites. So let's talk about your background and your story a little bit. Before starting Finance Feeds, as I outlined, you worked for major media publications in FX industry. Why have you decided to start Finance Feeds and what made you sell it eventually?
Well, actually, the intention was never really to sell it. I didn't have that in mind when I started it. One of the reasons for it was that going back to 2009, this is my 30th year in the industry. I started in 1991.
You're a real veteran.
I'm an old, cantankerous old man. That's what I am.
You're wise.
So what happened was, after a long period of time, almost 20 years of working in the industry on the institutional technology side of the business as a contractor. I was an IT contractor. Basically, I started to realize that there wasn't many, and then I saw the retail brokerage side of the industry go up and start to become new entrants into it in the early 2000s, when MetaTrader became available. Lots of other entities that had never been in this industry before joined the industry on the retail side. So I started seeing that happening, and I thought, okay, when you think about it, even on the institutional side, there was never really a common voice. There wasn't a place where anyone could go for real research on what they can do with their business. Whether if you were a broker in the 1990s, your supplier was a screen. You wouldn't know the people who were working there, and not necessarily able to speak to them about how to make your business decisions. So I thought, okay, what this industry needs is an actual centralized resource, so that every aspect of the industry, whether it's liquidity providers or brokerages or technology companies, can actually speak to each other and learn what each other is doing from a very detailed and sort of charismatic point of view as well, so that it engages people. And then what I did, started thinking about founding such a thing. So I looked around, and then I came across a picture on LinkedIn of a man I'd never seen before with a microphone, rather like your rather nice Yeti microphone there, and he had a platform to speak on, and behind him was a logo that said Forex Magnets. And I thought, who's that? This is a guy called Michael Greenberg, who is now very well known in the industry. So I messaged him, and it turned out he'd had the same idea, but he'd had it before I had. He managed to put it into fruition before I did. So I went to meet Michael. Turned out he lived very close to me at the time. And we said, okay, let's do it together. So I joined Finance Magnets. There was just myself and Ron Finberg there, who now works for a technology company. So we saw Finance Magnets it was called Forex Magnets back then, go up to what it is today, which is a very big and very well-known resource on the B2B side of the industry. So as time went on, it grew and so forth. So I joined LeapRate. The idea was to help them get into more of the institutional space, and to bring a sort of charismatic and community-orientated audience to LeapRate, which I did. And then it wasn't really possible for me to go any further unless I bought the company. So I looked at buying the company, made an offer was rejected. So I thought, okay, let's start Finance Feeds. Started Finance Feeds, and then last year was approached to sell it. And it was an opportune time because really it was time for me to go and work for a company. I moved to the UK. I've been here 2 years now, and it was time to go and work in the city of London for a company. So it was a good move potentially be the later end of my career. The idea is to sort of stay here now, really. So that's a sort of
What a
synopsis.
journey. What a journey,
Yes,
Andrew.
long journey, but very interesting and fun one.
Absolutely. So, because of given your experience of 30 years in the industry and running as well as working from all the major media outlets, let's talk about the coverage. You have more. We have more institutionally centered publications like FX Week, like eForex, for example, that are covering banks and larger FX institutions. And then we have margin FX industry kind of blogs that started as blog and now transformed into fully news media websites, like Finance Magnets, Leap Rates, Finance Feeds, FNG that was recently emerged. So what's your feel for industry coverage? Do you think it's enough? And if not enough, why aren't there more news outlets covering the market? Generally in the news space, in the news in general, there's a lot of blogs and the kind of opinion blogs that are emerging, covering, for example, crypto as a new asset class, but not so much in the FX space, on at least margin FX space as it appears. So what's your opinion on the general landscape? And I have some numbers here for listeners who are watching, but for the ones who are listening, I have a table here that summarizes the performance of the major margin FX and institutional FX media outlets, where it appears Finance Magnets has the highest authority score and the highest organic search traffic result. So Andrew, I'm curious to hear what are your thoughts on the general structure of the media coverage in the FX industry?
Well, I think that you're absolutely right. I know, Natallia, that you are very much an advocate of media within the industry, and you see it how it should be seen, as an important resource, an important linchpin that gets transparency out there and allows people who are in decision-making positions within companies to be able to get enough information to make an informed decision about who to partner with and and about how to drive their business forward in a sustainable manner. And I know that we've had those discussions over the years and so forth. So to answer that, I think that the FX industry is quite unique in the respect that it is a technologically driven business, but it's not so media. It's not so. It's not. Some people in the industry, some companies are not so. They don't court the media that much. They are interested in putting out relatively old-fashioned PR and sales orientated things, which have very limited value, because there's not nowadays. We live in an age of influencers and these sorts of people who come from nowhere, and they end up on TikTok and on YouTube and Instagram. And Instagram, I was told the other day by someone who's much younger than me, that's becoming obsolete now. So we have a situation where there's lots
things are moving fast.
Things are moving very fast, and that's the thing. So I think now we're in the post-information age. We're in the age of influencers, where people like Elon Musk, who's got nothing to do with this industry whatsoever, can just go on Twitter and then move whole markets by billions of dollars in one day, and no one says a word about it. So definitely the need is more than ever for as many of these news sources as possible. And I think,
following up on that, Andrew, do you think that the reason why there are influencers that are emerging, I mean, I know it's mainly in the crypto space, but
it is,
and
yes,
probably FX as well. Do you think it's because there is a gap between the media coverage? There's less opinions. There is less of that, deep analysis, and that's the gap that these influencers are trying to fill selfishly for the money.
Yes, of course. No, absolutely there is. For example, if you get onto some boards about cryptocurrency, some internal boards about people, not crypto enthusiasts, but actual owners of cryptocurrency platforms, their discussions are very different to that of FX industry people. They talk about hiring influencers to do one-off shows and displays and things like that, and they pay money for it. Whereas FX is more traditional, even though it's a high-tech business. So you have a couple of issues here that have become long-standing, really. One is that there's not enough, in my opinion, not enough genuinely diversified resources in the media space that look at that do enough research and have got the expertise to actually research the FX and the contact to research the FX industry and do it properly. There are literally 3 or 4, and that's it. And then within those who know what they're doing, and within that 3 or 4, they are sort of offshoots of other ones. For example, you mentioned FX News Group. That's Gerald Segal, and he founded LeapRate. And sold the company. He comes from an investment banking background, and he founded LeapRate, and he sold LeapRate to a media company, and then founded FX News Group. And his employees and so forth are very experienced and know this industry very, very well, and they know what they're doing. So they're a quality organization. Finance Magnets, which has been dominant for over 11 years now, 12 years even, is really the founding father of this research and reporting business. They have a research department. They know what they're doing. Then you have Finance Feeds, which is the company that I founded, which also is doing very well and is well respected in the industry. They've got industry executives and senior executives from the industry who now own the company. It hasn't been sold to a generic media business. It belongs to Forex industry professionals, and it's therefore it is still very much an internal resource for the industry. But there's not enough of them, and the problem is that back in the early days when media started on the B2B basis to attract B2B audience and get the industry talking, there was a lot of infighting between these companies. Saw each other as rivals, and they started fighting with each other. That's not the way. That is not how you build an information resource. If you look at Google's news inclusion, for example, their news inclusion is very user focused. Google itself is user focused. You cannot pick up the phone and talk to them and say, can you index my research at a certain level, because they do it according to what users would want. So they don't want to litter their homepage with lots of the same content. So by fighting with each other and trying to cover the same stuff, all you're doing is just making yourself de-indexed by Google. You'll end up at the very bottom of it, because what you should be doing is working together to get the best research out, and then each entity covers a different aspect of it, and you all end up in a prime position, and then the industry gets a wide view of what's going on. When I was very well known for being very opinionated and sarcastic in a lot of my approach, and I still am now. I'm here at ETX Capital. I have a remit to engage people on all kinds of subjects. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm doing a lot of what I did at Finance Feed in the same kind of tone. But if you think about how to engage people, it works, and it's a kind of way you have to get people thinking about certain things. There shouldn't be taboo subjects. It shouldn't be an old-fashioned way of silencing people and making people speak about just their product. It should be a forum for discussion. It should encourage everyone to talk together. And I think that a lot of them, you have these conferences and so forth, a lot of them should be on the same table. The leaders of these media entities should be, for example, I should be sitting at a table with Michael Greenberg, Gerald Segal, and the owners of Finance Feeds and all of those people, and we should be having an actual table discussion and inviting executives on there to talk about it. And that way, every piece of research is then given its airing, so that everyone can make a sort of impartial decision over how things are working in the industry.
Wow. Let's unload this. This is a lot of great points. So on the first one that you made, which is very important, that there's not enough resources to produce the quality articles, quality research. So I had a question for you about, in general, what are your thoughts and assessment of industry journalistic standards, such as accurateness, fairness, and objectivity? From my personal experience, right now, I feel that there's a lot less of that investigative type of journalism and analysis from most of these publications. I feel like most of the time what I see is basically republishing of the company's news that the companies that feed into the news outlets themselves. And, that doesn't add value. And it also frames the picture to the consumers, who are typically the traders, that might be inaccurate, because obviously companies are trying to put out there the best image of themselves, right? And you always have to dive deeper and dig deeper. And I don't feel like there's enough of that happening. I just see, as you mentioned, the old-fashioned press releases just being republished on the major media publications.
Well, if you ever have any trouble sleeping at night, just read a press release. because that'll fix it. Nobody wants to read those things. They are obsolete, and it's a thing of the past, and it's not engaging, it's not interesting, and it's biased. There's no value whatsoever in anyone reading it. Companies know that, but they see it as a way of getting them. There's a lot of companies in the industry, in any industry, that see the only way of getting themselves into the news is to pay for PRs. That's not the way. It isn't a revenue generator for even this is the thing that doesn't get considered very often. It's not even a very good revenue generator for the news sources, because no one really wants to pay very much to publish a PR, which means that if companies keep accepting those PRs at small value, they won't have the financial resources to go and do the research they need to do. And therefore, it becomes a never-ending circle of accepting cheap PRs and then not being able to not being able to invest in getting the right research done so that the industry can benefit from it. So in my opinion, the way to do it, and this is just my opinion, it's not the right way or the wrong way. My opinion, the right way to do it, from my point of view, is to have a very opinionated and impartial voice, so that you can actually go and speak to the right people in the industry and get their position out on important matters. And there should be no taboo subjects. You should be able to talk about wrong practices and what shouldn't be happening, because that's all part of research and reporting, and all other industries do it. If you watch Jeremy Clarkson talking about cars, he will sometimes say bad things about a manufacturer that sent him something to drive for the weekend. No problem, that's his opinion. You're allowed to do that. If you do that in our industry, a cease and desist letter appears and people are afraid of them. But all they're trying to do is, companies that try to do that are trying to hamper the transparency and carry on with their bad practice. The whole point of having a research institute is to out those bad practices and get rid of them, so that we have a better industry. So
it's a great point that you're making. I just wanted to follow up on that. So this inherent conflict of interest, and I think the reason why you get people upset and you get the cease and desist when you do try to put out the true story out there, is because there's inherently there is a conflict of interest. As a news media website, right? As a FX News B2B covering website, you are being paid by all those brokers to for their advertising on your website. So
yes.
how do you navigate that conflict of interest? How do you make it so that there is less of this flattering coverage just because this is the major sponsor of the event, or this is the major sponsor of the ads on the website? And I'm sure you and I witnessed this happening in this industry, where there were news publications that were covering some really delinquent brokers until the very end, despite the red flags being thrown all over the place. But because the company paid for the ads on the publication would refuse to produce the articles that will cover this company in a negative light. How do you combat that issue?
Well, there's so much wrong with that. In just one statement, there's so much wrong with that it's just the end. It's a race to the bottom. If you start behaving like that, and you start being bribed by companies to publish positive and unfactual nonsense, which is putting bad quality companies in a light in a way that no one's going to read anyway, because it's very advertorial, then all you're doing is you've got to start questioning whether you are an actual news source and you're running your own business, or whether you're a paid PR person for that company who owns you by the time they've done that. And therefore, when they go down, you go down, because your credibility is out of the window. Therefore, nobody will read your work. No one will spend money. And of course, you have to run a business. So the way to do it is to have branding and so forth of good quality companies on an annual basis, and having their contract that they're not allowed to influence the reporting, even if it's reflecting on their company. They have to accept that sometimes news happens and sometimes events happen. And obviously they should be, according to the journalistic code, they should be interviewed and they should be asked what happened here to have their say. But having their say is good enough. I mean, if I was a director of a big brokerage and something happened, which things do happen from time to time with big companies.
I mean, the Black Swan event, things can go unexpectedly and sour quickly.
Absolutely, and you don't even need to have a market event. Somebody, if you have a company with thousands of employees, maybe an employee might do something bad once. It's not your fault. It's just how that happens sometimes. So what you do is you say, "Oh, look, this is what happened." You give a statement. You don't say no comment and then threaten to sue the company because they're advertising. So what you do is you word your contract in a way that this is an impartial news source. We are not. The mistake that some companies make is that they come from the marketing side of the business. They think, "Oh, I know what, I can get a blog up and I'll sell advertising space and then I'll promote people's company." Then what you end up doing is just taking advertising revenue, which is usually less than the salary you would earn at a company as an employee in marketing, and then publishing this kind of PR. What you do is train retail brokerages to think that that's where they go to put out their propaganda. What you need to do is to establish it as a news source from the beginning, as an impartial resource for the industry, and word your contracts in a way that anyone who has a conference is allowed a keynote speech so they can introduce themselves and they'll have an audience in front of them. But what happens and what's discussed at that conference and what I say at that conference is up to me. And the same goes for anyone else who's speaking on a round table. Everyone has a fair share of voice and they should be able to have their opinion. And you shouldn't have to censor things like, if, for example, a company gets in trouble for internalizing or profit sharing. We've seen prime of prime, so-called prime of primes get in trouble for not being a prime of prime. That needs to be out in the newspapers. That needs to be fully examined and fully exposed. And I've done that a lot and been threatened for it, but I've never, ever had it go further than that. Because if you're doing the right thing and you're doing it in an impartial way, and you set your business up in a way that it is a fully impartial news source and you're covering all aspects and you interview the right people, that is journalism, and it should be journalism that should be allowed to prevail. And in my opinion, there are only a handful, if that, of companies in this industry that actually do that in a journalistic, correct fashion, or that have any personality or character. I mean, let's be fair. You have two issues. You have the bias, and you have people falling asleep because some of these things are catatonic, induced catatonia, and there's no excuse. There's no excuse for it. I can't remember who it was. A famous famous journalist on television, on the radio said, dead air time is something that shouldn't exist. Absolutely.
Yeah, right. Well, it's very interesting. I mean, I think it's easier said than done because I guess there are some contracts that are large enough where it's hard to say no, right? So despite the publication wanting to have that Chinese wall between the journalistic side and the advertising side, eventually things don't play out as initially planned, right?
Well, that's right. I've seen this a few times. Actually, there's this kind of behavior.
Human nature.
It's human nature, but it also is this kind of behavior. I've noticed it coming from certain relatively new sources in the Asia Pacific region.
Yeah. I was actually leading to that. That's why I said that, because I think by this other people observing what's happening in the media space, there are some entrants that are completely abusing it. And I actually have one of them here in the table called Fazako, which is some recent appearance. But before that, there was a Chinese company. There was a WikiFX that was just basically blackmailing brokers. And to my surprise, so many brokers paid for the 5-star reviews.
They're afraid. They shouldn't be afraid. They should not be afraid. My message to any retail broker out there or any industry participant who gets this ridiculous model and this is a really absurd model that quite a few, you'd be surprised. These two are Chinese companies, and that is a popular practice in China. But there are some non-Chinese companies that behave like this too. They will go to to the industry, reach out to marketing directors and not the CEO, but marketing directors who are worried about this kind of stuff. And they'll say, if you don't advertise with us and you don't pay us, we will say some bad things about your company. And instead of saying, all right, then you can go ahead and do that, which is the right answer. The right answer is, okay, feel free, go ahead. But what they will do instead is say, oh no, that's a terrible thing, because everyone in this industry has been brainwashed into thinking that if you don't submit to these things, any negative coverage is terrible coverage, even if it's not credible and it's nonsense. What you do is they say, oh, I better pay for that, and then they have an advert on there, and then the next year, then you end up with a law of diminishing returns. That company comes back to you next year, thinks those people fold, so I'm just going to increase it by double and say, now you're going to pay us double, otherwise we will do all sorts of things. What they should say is, no, I don't care what you publish, because it's nonsense and you don't know anything about this company, you're not proper researchers, feel free to go ahead. And then what happens is they have no revenue, all of their work is not credible, and it won't get indexed anywhere. It won't, there's no point them copying anything either, because you can go onto Google and have a copyright have their work taken down for breach of copyright, and after 2 months they give up and disappear.
It was very surprising to me to see the whole story with the WikiFX unveiled, because to my surprise, when I saw that, and I saw Advanced Markets had the lowest rating, and there were some absurd things that they said on the review page, and they came in asking for money, and they had nice packages planned. Here's how much you paid to get to the rating 4, and here's how much you paid for the rating 5.
Right.
And I thought it's obviously complete scam. And I was just surprised and shocked to see no one talking about it, no one covering it. Every industry kind of just silently sucked it up.
Except me.
Oh, yeah, right. You were probably the only one, because everyone just paid this people to get the 5-star review, and their business model obviously worked. And I'm just curious, what do you think? What does it say about the space that the people will just,
it's problem.
Buy
it's a
it
problem.
for a 5-star review? They'll pay the scammers.
For a 5-star review on a non-entity that no one's ever heard of, that has no credible research, and that nobody will pay attention to. I mean, here in the UK, people don't look at nonsense like that. They will go to Trustpilot, or they will go to a well-known, you have to think of it from a point of view of a business, like whether it's B2C or B2B, they'll go to Trustpilot. Or if they want to work for a company, they go to Glassdoor. They won't go to WikiFX, which is all full of mistakes and spelling errors. Everyone knows that's all false. So I published about it, let me see when that was. I can tell you it was about, January 2020, just after it came up. I published about it, explaining to brokerages that this is exactly as you've said. It is a fake, it's a scam in order to bribe, to blackmail brokerages into paying for advertising and then getting a bad review. And as you say, they've got a review tariff, almost a tariff, to show you how much you have to pay to get certain reviews. Now, anyone in any industry knows that proper research sites and proper investigative journalist sites do not have ratings or reviews or anything like that on them. Broker reviews, or we recommend these companies. That's not research. That's PR, and it's fake, and everybody knows that. It's also very old-fashioned. So everyone. There's no. In my advice to any broker is just to not worry about it and never submit to it. Just don't pay them. Go and, if you really want to be part of good research, you have to stop thinking about how many leads and clicks can I get from these sites, because that's not what they're for. You have to associate your name with good quality research, and that is the only way to do that is by participating in the research yourself, submitting research pieces as guest editorials with your opinion, getting involved in conferences so that you can actually have your say in front of the audience. And of course, a good quality news resource won't interfere with with what you want to say at a conference. If you want to say something, then it's your platform to say so. That's the whole point of reporting and research. Conference should basically be that, but in person. And that's how to really weed them out. And in the end, you end up spending less money to be part of good quality research, which over a long period of time benefits the industry and makes you have an easier life, than being blackmailed by Chinese scammers.
Yeah, and I feel it's just such a disservice to the investors, because investors, if you're a new investor, you go in and you probably do your Google search, and there's a lot of directories that show up with the reviews, and obviously those are typically owned by a broker or by an IB. So I mean, how much can you trust those? And does the industry, the B2B industry, does enough to cover the brokers so that people have somewhere to go to where they can read opinions from professional professional journalists and not, raiding websites from some scammers who just, the whole point of running the website is to embezzle money from the FX brokers. And more surprisingly is FX brokers all bought into that, which I still do not understand.
Well, I do to some extent. It's because a lot of those ones who did buy into it come from the affiliate marketing and lead buying background. They don't understand that you are supposed to be a fintech company and that you're supposed to integrate with other components of the fintech industry in order to make an electronic financial infrastructure ecosystem. So what they do is they think, oh, we have to buy clicks and leads, therefore we'll buy clicks and leads from these sites, and it's not the way. It's not what they're for. So you end up with these ones, which are any brokerage or tech company or anyone wanting to get research to test if there's good quality, genuine research coming from those companies. Check the credentials of who is writing those articles. You can easily do that. All the journalists who are on there have got backgrounds that span a long way. You can tell where they've been, and then ask the owners of the company, do you ever have any CPA deals, cost per acquisition deals on advertising or pay per click? Then you'll know that it's purely a rebate site. It's not really a proper journalistic news site. So it is in theory harder to operate a proper journalistic site. It will take you all over the world. You have to go and sit in people's offices. You have to know you have to keep up your relationship with all of the senior executives of all of the brokerages and technology companies and liquidity providers all over the world. And you have to invest a lot of time and resources into doing your research properly and and when you've done that, to present it in a way that's going to make people want to read it, which requires a bit of charisma. And that is a skill set which a lot of people who have been in the industry for a long time would have. You cannot just come up from nowhere with a load of adverts and expect to actually be a credible, good quality resource for the industry. And that's the problem. Whereas in other sectors like cryptocurrency, as you mentioned, there are lots and lots of these resources, because what they do is they're very opinionated people who go on, who become influencers. Here's the thing. I went out here in town, in the city, near, the Ned. The Ned is a very famous hangout for financial industry people in the city of London. And I was there today. I took my video camera with me and decided to approach people in the street who look like city people and talk to them about certain things. All of them run a mile because they're terrified when you put a camera in their face. And here we have a tech oriented. This is the biggest financial center in the world. It produces 65% of all institutional tier one FX order flow at interbank level. It invents most of the technology for the major financial transactions that go on around the world. It's full of very, very successful fintech companies that were startups 5 years ago but are now huge. These people who I'm approaching with a camera are massive movers and shakers, but then they're afraid when a guy in a t-shirt walks up to the camera. That's the mentality that's the problem. What they should do is stand in front of the camera and say, yes, this is what we do and this is why I like doing it. This is what we stand for, and we don't like this about the industry. We want to change that, and start speaking about their opinions, because then you get an impartial view directly from the source. But people are afraid of saying things, which is why when you then out something, a cease and desist order comes, because they want everything shushed up, and that is not how you engender transparency.
Right. Yeah, and I agree with that. There's a lot of secrecy in the way that brokerages are operated, and probably that's where the secrecy when speaking to the reporters is stemming from, because no one wants to know what's going on inside. Everyone wants to have the story that they share in the PR appear in the news, and that's as much as they want the industry to know about what's happening. But as you mentioned, you made some really good points here, is the industry owes it to the investors and to the traders to be objective and to be honest.
That's for sure.
And I echo your idea about the roundtable with all the founders of the major media outlets, because I think ultimately through this dialogue is how you can find the new ways to service the investors and all the stakeholders involved better. I mean, the brokers as well, right? Because I mean, it's understandable that brokers don't want to have the bad reviews, but at the same time, when you do have that negative feedback, that's when you you can take it, and that's how you making changes internally to improve it, right?
Yes,
And
that's right.
unfortunately, when you only have a one-sided coverage, and I think everywhere in the world, opinion type of journalism is very popular, and people love to read the opposing views,
Yeah,
right? They
very
love to
popular.
read when they love to read stories where there is a partisan approach, but it doesn't seem to apply as much to the FX journalism, or not anymore. We also haven't covered the demise of some of the major industry sources last year, for
Yes,
example,
very sad.
because
Very sad to see, actually. These were good quality companies.
right, exactly. And with the good quality, experienced journalists, and I know some journalists started their own publications, which is a good thing, right?
That is a good thing.
Because we need more, and through this competition, that doesn't have to be rivalry, is where you arrive at objective and coverage that has opinions from all sides, right? And so, as an investor, or as a person from the industry, you don't just read what the company puts out there, their announcement email or their PR. You actually want to read something more of investigation. You want to read analysis. You want to understand the ecosystem, how things interact within the industry, and unfortunately, we don't get much of that lately, or it appears to be so. So I'm hoping that roundtable with all of you guys will happen rather soon.
I wish. I really hope it does. And actually, it's important to look at. You're talking about. A very important thing here. These good quality companies. One of them, actually, Colin Lambert, Australian guy. He recently
That's who I had in mind when I said that they started his own
he did.
publication.
He did. He did, and I hope he does well with it. He's a very well respected reporter, and so you have the thing is, if you have very few companies who work who do this research, and the very good ones are really a handful, and if they if they keep on fighting with each other instead of working together, and bickering over, oh look, that's mine, they copied my work. Nobody should be copying anybody's work. That's just not what these things are about, and it's not research. If it's copied, that's feeble and it's not research. So what you do is you hire the right people and pay them properly, and then you don't have them working somewhere else, planting tomatoes or something in the daytime, and then copy pasting a couple of articles in the evening for piecework. That's not how you'd run one of these businesses. You employ the right people, and you get them you get the right research and the right stuff that's unique out, and people who know the industry. You then you can't. Another thing is not going through the newspapers and Bloomberg and CNBC and things like that, getting a few things of theirs and then writing about it. That's also not research. So it has to be done in a very unique way, and you have to make an effort to go and know the right people in the industry who are the leaders, so you can sit in their offices and actually work with them to get the research out. And long term, you get much better long-term sustainability for your own business. Plus, you actually make your part in proper reporting. And actually, you mentioned about opinions. Very important. You've got to have opinions. I had a column called Mind the Gap, which is it was no real significance towards people. People thought it was to do with spread or something. It's not. It's just a joke about London. Mind the Gap announcements on the underground that commuters in the financial sector hear every day on their way to work. So it was about that, and because it was all anecdotes from traveling into different parts of the world to talk to forex industry executives and observe things. All it was about things I'd observed over the week. Massively popular, very popular, because it was opinionated, amusing. Sometimes it denigrated things and it put things in their place when they needed to be put in their place. And it was done in a sarcastic way, and it kind of shows the insight into what someone who goes around from the outside from an eagle-eye view, a bird's eye view, sees when you're going around from my point of view, when I go around and see what happens inside different companies and observe things. That's what it was about. But that's all part of research. It's very important, because that way you can see what happened that week. And yes, it's amusing and sarcastic, but there was points in there which were really important for people to take note of. Otherwise, there's no point publishing them.
Right, absolutely. Well, Andrew, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the industry evolving further and becoming more opinionated, as you mentioned.
Yes.
We'll love to see more opinions. And
Absolutely.
on that note, thank you so much for coming to the show. I'm sure we're going to do more episodes. This is just such a loaded topic. There's a lot more other things that we can cover, but we are limited to 45 minutes to keep it in digestible pieces for the audience, and we'll do more. Please write to us if you have any other ideas about what you would like us to cover in the FX media space. But Andrew, thank you so much. It was always a pleasure, and you're always full of enthusiasm and full of ideas and full of opinions, which is important.
Thank you, Natallia. Really great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Likewise. Thanks.
All the best.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Any views or opinions presented on this podcast are solely those of the author and do not represent those of Advanced Markets. Trade in foreign exchange or other financial instruments on margin carries a high level of risk and may not be suitable for all investors. The high degree of leverage can work against you as well as for you. Before deciding to invest, you should carefully consider your investment objectives, level of experience, and risk appetite. The possibility exists that you could sustain a loss of some or more of your initial investment, and therefore you should not invest money that you cannot afford to lose. You should be aware of all the risks associated with trading and seek advice from your broker or an independent financial advisor if you have any doubts. Anyone opening a live trading account needs to adhere to the laws of their local country, as such laws may differ from country to country. Advanced Markets expressly disclaims any liability for any lost principal or profits without limitation, which may arise directly or indirectly from the use of reliance on information provided through this podcast.